And we're live. Welcome back, everyone. Attorney Craig Steger here, practicing in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. Today, I wanted to talk about a sort of a shocking verdict, a so-called nuclear verdict down in Texas from last year, and it's a case that's been closely watched since the verdict came out. And so, let me tell you a little bit about it. So, in in a trial last year, I think it was in 2024, Werner Enterprises, most of you, if you've spent any time on the road, know who Werner Enterprises is. It's a very large trucking company. I believe they just haul freight around the country, but that's about the extent of my knowledge. And in Texas, back in 2014, what was happening is a Werner truck, and they had a new driver, which was sort of at the center of the allegations in the case. But they had a new driver, I think, in training, and beside the driver was a supervisor who was sleeping. And they were traveling on an interstate highway, so two lanes in each direction. It's not clear to me which lane of travel the truck was in, but it was in one of the two lanes going in one direction, and then in coming in the other direction was a pickup truck, I believe, operated by someone, and then there was another person and two or three children in the vehicle. And it was apparently icy, and so what had happened is the pickup truck coming from the opposite direction, lost control on ice, came across the median, which everyone says is around 40 feet, but the the grassy median in between the interstate travel lanes. The pickup truck came across the median and found himself in front of this Werner truck going in the opposite direction. And it sounds like the Werner truck hit the pickup truck more or less, not head on, but and it was a pretty horrible crash. And I believe one of the children was killed. And then there was yeah, so there was a 7-year-old who was killed. There was catastrophic permanent injuries to a 12-year-old girl, and then another 14-year-old was injured, and then the mother who was in the vehicle was injured. Um, doesn't say anything about the driver. I don't know if the driver must have. So anyway, so they brought this lawsuit against Werner Enterprises because that was the semi that ran, that they hit. And they got a $100 million verdict, and it doesn't look like it has a punitive damage claim to it. It looks like it's pure compensatory damages. Um, and let's see, it looks like, so the jury award was in May of 2018, and it was for $89.7 million. And then this was later revised to $100 million. I don't know for sure. My assumption is it was for some sort of interest accruing, or maybe some states allow pre-trial offers of settlement or something like that. But it got bumped up to $100 million. And then that fall, so in October of 18, the Werner had appealed that to a court of appeals in Texas, and then the Texas Court of Appeals took a while. So I suppose with COVID, maybe. So they appealed in October of 2018, and then in May of 2023, so like 4.5 years later. Boy, that's a long time. 4.5 years later, the Court of Appeals upheld it. I believe there was two dissenting opinions, and then in August of 2023, the Werner had appealed that ruling to the Texas Supreme Court. And in August of 2024, so I guess the verdict is a little older, but in August of 2024, the Texas Supreme Court had decided to accept review of it, and they held oral arguments on December 3rd. And as far as I know, that case is still pending before the Texas Supreme Court. Um, and I think there's a lot of people watching that verdict. And so there's been a lot of this verdict based on sort of that baseline of facts is pretty shocking to most people, and for a number of reasons. As I understand it, from what I've been able to gather, the truck driver was driving under the posted speed limit because of the icy conditions. Um, Maintained control of his vehicle, hit the brakes when the plaintiff's vehicle passed in front of him and was not able to stop. And as I understand it from reading some of the commentary, one of the issues in that case was the causation standard. So so there's no evidence that Werner or its driver actually caused the crash. I mean, that seems pretty obvious from what we've been able to gather, that it was caused by the other driver losing control on ice. Um, there's no real evidence that I can see that Werner was negligent. You A lot of people had said, well, the driver couldn't have been negligent because he was driving under the posted speed limit. Well, that's actually not the standard. So the speed limit sets sort of the maximum that you're allowed to drive, but it doesn't set what is considered a reasonable speed limit under the circumstances. So in icy conditions, it's understood that you may not be able to drive the speed limit, and even if you're driving 50 miles per hour on icy conditions, that's probably unsafe. That could be unsafe, even though technically speaking, you're not exceeding the speed limit. So the fact that the driver was apparently not, um, he was not going over the speed limit doesn't mean that they were driving at a safe and prudent speed under the circumstances. It would not mean that the other driver was paying attention. Um, as things play out in front of you, and as you'll probably hear from me in some other videos, there is some will argue there's a heightened duty of care for truckers because they're driving large vehicles that are more difficult to slow down, more difficult to brake, actually have a heightened duty to watch out for other motorists on the roadway, including motorists that themselves are violating, or are not driving safely. There is an element of defensive driving that some will say is expected of truck drivers. I'm not here to argue that point, but I know from having litigated these kinds of cases um, that is a standard that some trucking companies are held to. Okay, so it's possible it's possible that the trucker wasn't paying attention, and as this, it takes a little bit of time. The fact that the vehicle came across traffic sort of cuts both ways, because yes, you're not necessarily expecting vehicles to come across traffic and slide in front of you, but on the other hand, it gives you additional time to anticipate what's going on and take defensive steps, such as slowing down, changing lanes, something like that. So it most likely gave the truck driver in that case additional time to anticipate what was going to happen, as opposed to if it was a vehicle directly in front of them that lost control. And so I think that's something that people ought to keep in mind, and it may have been one of the factors that led to the verdict in that case. But it seems to me, and this I'm just reading between the lines here because I don't have access to the actual trial transcripts and stuff like that, but as I indicated to you, so the driver was a new driver, and and he and there was one of the issues that came up in the case, and I've seen this come up in cases that I've litigated, is this. Um, a company, especially a company like an employer or trucking company, can be liable for their driver's conduct, but if their driver is driving in the scope of their employment, um, in a lot of states, the employer, the trucking company, is going to be what we call vicariously liable for that. They're going to become liable because this is their agent out there. That's whether the trucking company did everything right in hiring and training and supervising them. They may be vicariously liable for their employees' actions. Well, there's actually an additional theory of liability that can arise, and it's called negligent hiring, negligent training, negligent supervision, where the trucking company is actually not doing an appropriate job of vetting people, of taking them out and training them on how to do things, and or supervising them, giving them instruction, whatever the case may be. In this case, we know that according to the reports, there was a supervisor in the truck with this guy who was sleeping at the time. Now, I don't know if that supervisor was supposed to be awake or not, but the supervisor was in there apparently doing some training for this truck driver and was asleep at the time. Well, if you're asleep, you're obviously not going to be able to give this new driver guidance on how to drive under the conditions. So maybe that was part of the basis for it, um, because there was that there, according to some of the reports, there was allegations of negligent hiring, training, and supervision, and there was a dispute in that case whether the jury should ever hear that evidence where they are already where the trucking company has already acknowledged that we're responsible, we're legally responsible, we're vicariously liable for this person's actions. I've had that fight myself in litigation cases, and I understand the arguments and merits to both sides of it. It looks like in this case, the trucking company attempted to keep out that evidence, the negligent hiring, training, supervision evidence, um, because in their mind, it didn't add anything to the case and only added evidence to sort of inflame the jury against them. I don't know what the evidence was, but presumably there was some um, somewhat damning evidence in there about how they hired and trained this person, and so that looks to be maybe one of the reasons why the verdict came down, and it could have been why the jury found that there was uh, fault at all on the part of the trucking company. I don't know. I'll see if I can get an actual look at the pleadings in that case. I'm just going off of news reports that I'll link to below, just so that you have those. You can take a look at them yourself. But it's a huge verdict, and it is. I mean, I don't know that the verdict amount is all that shocking in light of the the injuries in this case. You have a dead child, and you have two children who are catastrophically injured, going to have a lifetime of care. Um, that the amount of the damages doesn't necessarily seem that shocking in light of the severity of the injuries. But I think for most people, what is shocking here is the size of the verdict in light of what seems to have happened here. So it's going to be interesting to watch. The Texas Supreme Court has it. I don't know anything about the Texas Supreme Court in terms of how quote unquote conservative they are. My sense is that the Texas courts are fairly conservative, and by conservative, that often means that they are more favorable to corporations and insurance companies. Not always, but that's sort of the general assumption, is that conservative-minded Supreme Court justices and Court of Appeals justices tend to favor the defense a little more, and more liberal-minded tend to favor plaintiffs, the injured people themselves. But so it'll be interesting here to see. I don't know how long it will take. The oral arguments were just in December, and judging just from the speed that this thing has worked its way through the Texas appellate system, it wouldn't surprise me if it's a while before we actually see a verdict in that result, a Supreme Court decision in that case. So when that comes out, if it's noteworthy, I'll do a live stream then. So if you have any questions about any of that, comments, I could see a verdict like this being very controversial and people having strong opinions about this. And so I'd be curious to hear what they are. And I'll do my best to respond to those if I can. Otherwise, stay tuned. I live stream most mornings between 5:30 and 6 o'clock a.m. Central Time. Not every day, but I try to do it most weekdays if I can. So if you ever have a topic that you'd like to hear me talk about, feel free to leave a comment or go to the description, and my contact information should be there. I'm always happy to talk about things that other people find interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Appreciate you watching, and until next time, everyone, have a good one.